Not all workplace journeys are the same for everybody. Not all employees have the same experiences. And a lot of that has to do with being different than those traditionally in power. That could be due to our sexual orientation, or the color of our skin, how we were raised, our economic status, where we went to school, and our gender. How are we expected to really embrace diversity, equity, inclusion if we can't even address it for half the world's population? My guest today will highlight the challenges that still very much exist for women in the workplace and what we can do about it. This episode will have a lot of non-surprises for many of you. You're living it. For others, however, it may open some eyes. Hold on. Welcome to Relationships at Work, the emerging leader's guide for creating a workplace we love. I'm your host, Russel Low-Kramen. I've got a couple of decades of experience in those areas I'm a big nerd about, communications, leadership, but I also have this thing, curiosity. Much like you, I want to make the workplace a better place, and this show is a great resource for that. Another great resource you may or may not know about is Raw Notes. These are a weekly note that I pass along to you that is a quick little insight and resource for all things leadership, workplace culture, employee experience. It just slips into your inbox every Thursday, but to sign up to it, you've got to go to russellolliker.com and you'll see a sign up right there in the menu, free interview templates. You go there, you get yourself a free tool on how to help you interview your employees through their journey, from onboarding to staying to thriving to exiting. It's really actually designed to be holistic, to actually ask questions that reinforce each other to get you to the end where you feel like you've actually supported your employee throughout their entire journey. Well, anyway, that's a free tool. So it sounds great? Great. All you have to do is go sign up, and then you have Raw Notes right there in your inbox weekly. All for free. But I want to dial back to what we started this podcast talking about. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. You can add belonging to that as well. They're essential for a healthy, thriving workplace. But we have a lot of work to do. Gender equity, it continues to be an issue. And I've seen examples over the years online where people, usually males, are saying, but we are equitable. Gender equity is done. It is legally mandated in countries, so it is solved. It's not a problem anymore. Okay, well, there's a lot more to it. Because say we are talking about pay. Where are we talking about it? Because it's still an issue in some places. Maybe not in some, but it is in others. Promotability. We could argue it's better, but it's not great. And we want great. We want equitable. Equity. How about culture? Well, that really is a case-by-case basis. It depends on where you work, who you work for. As emerging leaders, regardless of our gender, we have to take this stuff seriously, or we're part of the problem. My guest today works with assistants and managers globally in helping them navigate these biases in the workplace, whether it's obvious or not, because it is very different for women than for men. And she's going to talk about those challenges and the reality of the situation. Now, as I mentioned, obviously a lot of this won't be new information to the women listening. And I'm not saying it's new for all men either. And our guest does a great job of illustrating how we all are part of the problem and the solution. Let's hear from Bonnie. And on the show today, we have Bonnie Low-Kramen. And here is why she is awesome. She's the founder, CEO, and global leader / trainer at Ultimate Assistant Training and Consulting. She's a keynote speaker. She has a fantastic TEDx talk called The Real Reasons People Quit. She's the author of the book, got it right here myself, Staff Matters, People-Focused Solutions for the Ultimate New Workplace. Bonnie's also the CEO and founder of the Speak Up Pledge, a global initiative and call to action for assistants and managers to improve workplace communication, something near and dear to my heart. All the hellos, Bonnie. Hello.
Thank you, Russell. I am very excited to be here with you.
Well, we have to start off the show like we start off all shows, Bonnie, with the question, what's your best or worst employee experience?
Yeah, of course I have both. Lots and lots of both. One of the best ones, though, comes from my work with Olympia Dukakis. I hope many of your listeners know her work. She won an Oscar for the movie Moonstruck with Cher and Nicolas Cage. And I came to her one day because I was a part of an organization in New York City called New York Celebrity Assistance. And it had become such an important resource in my work with her. And the board came to me and asked me to run for, or be the president, to be the next president of the organization. And I was nervous to tell Olympia about this because I was concerned that she, as my employer, would think like, oh, this is going to take time away from me, right? And my son was 7 years old at the time, I remember, and I was just nervous to tell her about it. And I sat, I chose my moment and I told her what the ask was. And her whole face changed. She got a big smile on her face and she said, Russell, I'll never forget it. She said, do it. Do it. You have to do it. This is going to be so good for you, Bonnie. This is going to be so good. And I was so shocked. And she said, this is the best thing. And I said, well, Olympia, it's going to be good for you too. And she said, oh, no, that doesn't matter. I know it's going to be good for me, but mainly it's going to be good for you. And I felt so supported by her. And Russell, like, I hope in your career you have felt that kind of support. Like not only, oh, okay, like kind of the reluctant, tolerating kind of support, we know that, versus the enthusiastic, like, yes, like this is so great. This will be so good for you. That was pretty awesome. And when someone, whether it's your employer or somebody else, does that for you, you never forget it. And that's the kind of, I would have lain in front of a truck for her, is the end result. When somebody supports you like that, there's a lesson there. There's a serious lesson there for leaders, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, isn't it sad, though, the amount of mental load that we put on ourselves with the expectation that we're not going to get that support, that we are putting ourselves in a position that it's going to be, I don't know, bad for us, or they're not going to be as supportive of those decisions. But to get that enthusiasm, I wish the default was always that was what it was going to be, as opposed to it's a special case.
Yeah. And to be fair, real life works. It's not all black and white, right? There were those days when I would be tired because there was a late meeting the night before, and she'd look at me and she'd say, oh, you seem pretty tired today. You have a meeting last night? Was the group meeting? Like she would sometimes say those kinds of things. So, it's these partnerships are tricky, and that's what the whole purpose of your podcast is, right? To explore the nuances, the real nitty gritty of what these partnerships are like.
Absolutely. I'm excited about today's topic. I dug into it quite a bit in your book as well, around gender equity. Now, one of the things I love doing on my podcast first is let's define what the hell we're even talking about. So like setting the baseline. So when we talk about gender equity, Bonnie, what are we actually talking about?
When we talk about the difference between the genders in the workplace, as a woman in the workplace, I see a double standard. I experience the double standards on a daily basis. And let me just say this very clearly. Women and men are not equal. And we're different. We're hardwired differently. But in the world today, we not only don't have equality, we don't have equity. Women are not treated with the same respect and level of compensation, for example. There is a wage gap that exists. And I know you're in Canada, I'm in the United States. In the United States, Caucasian women are making 79 cents for every dollar a man makes. And if we keep going at this rate, it's going to take over 100 years to get to equity. And that's in part indication that men actually are better at negotiating salary than women are. Women are not trained to do that necessarily, and men are socialized differently. The equity issues in part are due to how we are socialized differently as young men and women. And then it gets even more complicated when you talk about the other genders, the LGBTQIA, transgender people. It's even more tricky there. So I think it's simpler to talk for this conversation about men and women who are born cisgender people. So it's not only about money. It is about promotability in tech. In tech, for example, it's pretty well known that tech companies love hiring women, but women end up quitting 3 times faster than men do because they feel that they have to prove themselves again and again and again in order to advance. The data is clear on something else. And it has to do right now in 2023, the hybrid remote work situation we've got going on. The data is clear that women are still doing 6 hours more of housework a week than men do. And so therefore, it's pretty logical why women are choosing or would like to stay at home. They're preferring to stay at home because they can, mix in that 6 hours of housework along with their regular work. The danger is, and as a woman, I'm concerned about what I'm seeing because the pandemic has done damage for the world's women. Many were chased out of the workforce during the pandemic because they needed to homeschool children, demands for childcare and parents, who, whatever it was. We lost a lot of women in the workforce. And then in the aftermath of the pandemic, many are preferring to stay home for a variety of reasons. It's about the work-life balance and being able to be there for the children. But what's also in play is if they stay home, it's less likely they're going to be bullied. It's less likely they're going to be sexually harassed, But the danger is the invisibility factor. There is a trend, Russell, right now called the proximity bias. Mm-hmm. And it is the trend, and I'm sure you know this, that there's the people who are in the office are having an advantage over the ones who are staying at home because they have proximity. The people in the office have proximity to the leaders who are busy making decisions in real time. And if people are right there, then they are, have proximity to the decisions being made and possibly being brought into the project, whereas the people at home are not. And if those people at home, we now know are a majority of women, and if they're choosing to not be on webcam and not be verbal, then you're essentially invisible. And that's a red flag that I'm raising on podcasts like yours and in groups of women and men, just so that we can be intentional about what's going on and what's in play here.
In your book, you make a point to say that gender equity is not a woman's issue, it's a human issue and a family issue. Why did you feel you needed to clarify that?
A lot of people are very quick to say, oh, well, when you're talking about gender equity, it's all about women and it's only a women's issue. Well, it really isn't, because what a woman earns impacts a whole family. And I meet far too many women who are underpaid because of this wage gap, and they're living paycheck to paycheck and they feel stuck. So they can't move to a better apartment. They can't put their kid in, a dance class, or it has ramifications to whole families, right? That what a woman earns impacts her spouse, whether, it's a partner or spouse or whatever, and the children. So it is a family issue. This has much more far-reaching effects. It's not only about women.
So I want to kind of walk through what an employee journey might be. So let's start first from a women's challenges standpoint, which is, say you're looking for a job. What should you consider before you take a job? What are some of the things that you should, as a consideration as you're looking to take that step?
The socialization tells women that we need to be grateful for the job. We're grateful. Thank you so much for hiring me. And my message to women is that we approach job opportunities as a two-way street. Women are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And it should be about talents and skills and responsibilities. So it's about evaluating a job description and equating it to a dollar amount that's fair and reasonable for the role, as opposed to whether you're a man or a woman. And so it's about market value for a role. And many women, because of that gratitude factor, that we feel grateful for the position, that sometimes we accept a lower salary. A man is much more likely, is 57% more likely to negotiate a salary than a woman is. A woman is much more likely to hear a job offer and say, oh, thank you so much. I will start on Monday. And my message is that we need to negotiate. HR people will tell me to my face, Bonnie, we will offer someone the lowest amount that they will say yes to. And that is the truth of it. HR is in the business of getting people for the lowest amount of money they can get someone to say yes to. But women often have buyer's remorse. They have, they sometimes accept a job without a written job description. The job description must be in writing. The offer must be in writing. And the data shows, Russell, that women are better at negotiating a starting salary than men are. But then that's where it ends, that many women are not as skilled at negotiating the annual review and compensation conversations in the years to come, that in general, women hope that we work real hard and our hard work will be acknowledged and rewarded. And I'm here to tell you that doesn't happen, that we, both women and men, need to advocate for ourselves, that we need to have the conversation, but it's finding those words that women find so difficult to have. And that's why you're asking me, what do I advise? I advise that every woman, every person, working person, needs to have a written, detailed job description that's up to the minute. What are you really doing right now? And how much time is it taking you to do it? And what are the quantifiable achievements that you've had? It needs to be in writing, because at any given time, if executive or anybody says, so what do you do exactly? What do you do? Oh, here's my document, 3 pages long, but this is exactly what I do for these different executives at my company. This current workplace is going so fast. We cannot expect other people to have a really clear picture of what we're doing. So every worker needs to be responsible for painting that picture. I do advocate annual performance conversations, even if it doesn't translate to more money. It's important to have ongoing conversations about what your ambitions are and what goals are. And for many women, the word ambition is kind of a dirty word. Mm-hmm. And we're not really supported to have great ambition, where men, that's what I've talked about with the double standard. Men are supported very strongly to have big ambition, and women are not. That is not the way women approach ambition.
What does success look like when you start that job? Because it's challenging, but onboarding is such an interesting thing, because organizations kind of use it as this, well, whether it's good or bad onboarding, as this promise of things to come. This is what they're setting up, whether they deliver on those promises or not. So my question to you is, what are organizations getting wrong when it comes to onboarding for women?
Well, they're getting it wrong with both men and women, because in rooms of assistance, I'll ask, how many of you have a great onboarding system process? And very few raise their hand. I call that a gap. I think HR in this post-pandemic workplace, and even they say it, they're in chaos. They're overwhelmed. I hear shocking stories, disappointing stories about an employee, a new employee who shows up on day one and no one's expecting them. In fact, the people who are there are kind of annoyed that they have to deal with them. And but we all remember our first day. Of anything, right? We remember our firsts. We remember our first job. We remember our first day, our first month, our first year. There are companies that do it really well, One of them is Novartis out of Boston. They have a buddy system where every new hire is given a buddy. And, a la when we were in grade school, but it's a system that works. It's someone to kind of be their phone a friend. And not every employee is a buddy. There's a group of people who are official buddies, and they will answer those minutia questions. How do I scan something in this machine that no one explained to me? Even if someone's been working in the workplace a really long time, any new job is going to have a learning curve. Onboarding is meant to shorten the learning curve and to help communicate the culture. Russell, I can tell you that so many staff say to me that the job description that they signed their name to and they said yes to bears very little resemblance to what they end up actually doing. And that feels like, well, who's asleep at the wheel here? How did I not get clear expectations? So there's a disconnect between what staff believes their experience is going to be at a company, and this applies to women and men, versus what is the reality. And so I know we can do better in that way. Success is a company where new staff get integrated very quickly. They get introduced. Like there's not really a mystery here. How do you make someone feel comfortable and welcome? Is you introduce them to people, and you make it easy you give them a list of contact information about how to find certain things. And yes, some companies have videos that you watch, and there's a very organized onboarding process, but unfortunately, those are more the exception and not the rule. I know we must do better in this way in order to stabilize our companies. I know you and I share the idea that this workplace is really volatile. There's a lot of change going on, and the humans of our workplace are really getting tired of the, we're going back, we're not, it feels like, it's like whiplash every day. It's like, what new rule, what new thing, what new variant, what new system are we putting in place today?
And it seems so much more about reacting, pivoting, resiliency, which is a word I freaking hate. Because it's like, what are you being resilient against? But the thing is the lack of compassion that's not integrated into those conversations. It feels much more about how are we as an organization going to be more productive in change, rather than understanding that these are not a means to an end. These are human beings.
Yeah, these are not widgets.
No, but that's a piece that I feel isn't as prominent as I would like it to see. And then that comes for any gender. But the one thing I want to ask though is you touched on this, and I want to know if it's the organization or the individual that is more needing to step up. So the broken rung. The broken rung, for those who are not familiar about it, is the idea, as Bonnie was mentioning earlier, about women are being hired. They're just not being promoted. So there is this rung in the ladder that is different for men versus women, where I think the stat from Kinsey is for every 100 men that are promoted, 87 women are promoted, 82 women of color. So when people ask why are there not more women executives, it's because if you go down the ladder, there was this piece where they didn't get promoted as readily or as obviously as men did. Who's dropping the ball here? Is it women, like you said, not selling themselves, or organizations not figuring out this is their problem?
Well, I liken that question to a couple of things.
Sure.
So when women received the right to vote in the United States, for example, it wasn't only because women were saying, we want to vote. Men had to be involved in that decision. Right? We need allies. We need advocates. It can't be that. When slavery was ended, it wasn't only because the slaves were saying, we want to be free. A lot of other people, white people, non-Black people, non-slaves, needed to say, we want this. So if more women are going to be promoted along those same lines, Russell, non-women are going to, meaning men, are going to have to be advocates and allies, not only tolerate women getting promoted, but to be staunch advocates for it. And not only because it's a nice thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The data is clear that a more diverse leadership in government, in companies, is a more creative, more innovative, resourceful one. And women, to bring a female sensibility into leadership is smart business. And so we need men to be, there's a term I love out of Harvard, they call them man-ambassadors, man-ambassadors, to be a man who strongly promotes women to advance. But there's another issue in play here. I mean, we didn't get to this place in a second, so it's going to take a while to move us off of it. But, it's back to women, how women are socialized. And women are socialized when we're young. And I say this to women, that we're socialized to look at each other as adversaries and as competitors, not as collaborators and cooperators. Right. We look at each other as the enemy. We look at each other for, we seek the approval of men. Like that's how a lot of women are socialized. So we get into adulthood, and this socialization is so ingrained that sometimes women are not very nice to other women. That's why I expose this issue. So how that plays out in what you're talking about with promotion. When a woman is ambitious enough to finally achieve a leadership position, inevitably they're going to be making some mistakes or some missteps, or there are going to be problems. When men make mistakes and make missteps, we give them grace. We say, oh, that's okay, Joe. That's all right. Well, we'll get it right the next time. You hear that in baseball or the sports, like, oh, you strike out. It's all right. We got your back. We'll get you next inning, whatever. When women are promoted, if we allow the socialization to kick in, then we end up at any misstep, we end up judging and diminishing and maybe pulling down. And my message to women is not only do we need to be advocates and allies to get women to leadership positions, but once they're there, we need to give them the same grace that we're giving men. And when they screw up, we need to not say, oh, you have to resign, you have to quit, let's fire them. No, we need to tolerate and to support them to work through the mistakes in the same way we do for men. What do you think of that?
You're talking about culture. You're talking about a culture of an organization and how healthy it is. And culture is the actions and inactions that is condoned or not condoned. So I completely agree with you. And you mentioned this earlier that I really want to tap into, which is the idea around women being happier to stay at home because of maybe an environment of bullying or sexual harassment. How do women, and you sort of mentioned this in the book, is how women treat bullying and sexual harassment differently in the workplace, and that there's sort of this steeper price for how they deal with that. Can you dig into that a bit?
Well, yeah. So women have also been socialized to believe that we need to tolerate some levels of misbehavior by men. And we experience it, and I've experienced it myself, walking down the street and cat calls from men, or somebody inappropriately touching you. And unless somebody comes along to say, that's not okay, that shouldn't be all right. One of the big famous cases in recent memory is Harvey Weinstein, who the Hollywood producer who's in jail right now for sexually assaulting over 100 women. And when he was in court, he said, oh, well, that was the 70s. That's the way it always was. That's the way it was. It was the casting couch, and I was just doing what everybody else was doing. And so that's culture. And that was his defense. and many women get sucked into the idea that that's the way it is. And in my sessions, when I talk about workplace bullying, being behaviors like, being humiliated in a meeting, having profanity thrown at them, being ostracized, being demeaned, being sexual harassment is a form of bullying, and I use very vivid examples in my book of how it really is. The executive who came up behind his assistant in a meeting with a lot of people, took her by the head and shook it from side to side and said, "Hey, did you leave your brain at home today?" And that may have taken 10 seconds to experience, but the memory of it, the trauma of it lasts for years. And that's the piece that makes me know that I have to talk about this as often as possible. Women, we remember. I mean, men remember also, but because women are the primary targets of bullying and sexual harassment, it is very clear to me that women remember this in a visceral way, and it impacts their future. However, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, if putting food on their table for their children depends on their paycheck, they are very reluctant, Russell, to make waves, to rock the boat, to challenge the bully, to challenge the sexual harasser. That's why it will be better if we close the wage gap. If women feel that they have more breathing room, if they have a cushion of money to rely on, then they have the ability to go to their executive and say, "I don't know what gave you the idea that touching me in that way was appropriate, but it is not. And it is not welcome. And you will not do that to me again. Because if you do, I'm going to report you, or I'm going to go to HR, whatever." But Russell, women need to be taught that it's wrong, B, given some instruction about what to do about it when it happens, and then C, feel confident enough to actually do it, because otherwise they're suffering in silence. It's a toxic global epidemic that I see, and far too many women tell me their stories, and they share that they're suffering in silence because they feel like they're trapped, that they have to do it, that they don't have an option, especially if someone else on the staff has reported it in the past and leaders are looking the other way. That's a problem. That's a big problem.
There's that inaction of culture that is your culture. An example there is, again, I had another episode where I talked to Patty Temple Rocks, and her focus is around ageism. And she finally wrote in her latest book, there's a chapter specifically around women's experience around ageism, because that is much more prevalent and a challenge than men. It is a problem for both genders, but women definitely feel a lot more. How would you talk about ageism in the workplace and the issue that it is?
How I handle it, and what I believe, is that we as women need to look honestly at the situation, which is that there is a double standard in play. We know as women that we are judged differently than men are. I can't walk on stage to be a speaker in the same way that I see some men walking on stage as a speaker. And if I walked on stage like Mark Zuckerberg does, right, in a hoodie and sneakers, do some women do that? Maybe so, but my audience would not accept me, wouldn't believe me, wouldn't find me credible if I did that. And I believe that to my soul. And I'm in my 60s. My move, I think our move for women is to amplify our talents and our skills, and frankly, to look as good as we possibly can, because we know we're being judged on that level. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. And I'm pretty convinced in my lifetime, I'm not going to see it be any different. The men of this world have the power and the gold, and if I'm going to succeed, if women are to succeed in that climate, we need to look honestly at what's in play. I do think there's an advantage of just whatever you have to look as great as you possibly can, because we're being judged on that way, and to make sure that the people we're dealing with understand the skills and the talents that we bring to the table. That should matter most, as opposed to our age. Now, on a resume, for example, many recruiters are saying they've moved away from degree required to degree preferred. Now, many women in their 50s or their 60s, they got that degree, if they have one, decades ago. It matters, it should matter, and it does matter way more if you've taken a workshop in the last year about upping your skills. It should be about the skills and the talents you bring to the table right now, and to hopefully have advocacy, because, Russell, there are a few other things in play here. There's a confidence that comes with experience. And in a meeting, the data is clear, and I've experienced myself, women are interrupted 6 times more than men are. And so when women are interrupted, have you seen this by any chance?
I've read a few books about how this is so prevalent, and there's a book recently just called STFU, which is about how men over talk women all the time. And it's just such nature. The funny thing is, when the interviews around the book, all the women in the interview are like, yeah, we've known this for a very long time. It's men that just never figured this out.
Well, yeah. And so when it happens, we're socialized as women like, oh, we're going to just let it go. We're going to let it slide. And my message to women is, if you're another woman or man, if you're sitting there, Russell, and you see a woman being interrupted, it doesn't have to be mean. You could say, oh, George, you know what? I'd love to hear the rest of what Bonnie was just saying. Bonnie, could you just finish that thought? And George, I can't wait to hear what you have to say, but I was really interested in what Bonnie was finishing saying. We need to have each other's backs, and it comes to that. Many women, I'll bet this was also in the book you just read, where women have the experience where they'll say an idea in a meeting and there's kind of crickets. Nobody says anything. And then John says the same exact version of that idea. And everyone's like, oh, what an amazing, groundbreaking idea that is. And so your move then is like, oh, John, that's so great that you love what Jill was talking about. That was a great idea, Jill. And, maybe the two of you can work on that together. But good going, Jill. And glad you picked up on that, John. Do you see where I'm going here?
Absolutely.
That the rest of us need to be advocates and allies when we see these behaviors happening in front of our eyes.
You mentioned about the self-promotion and that women aren't socialized into self-promoting. But the thing is if they don't self-promote, that's viewed negatively. And if they do self-promote, it is viewed negatively. So how is that approached in an organization?
Oh, boy. So I call it, and I teach women how to be each other's wing women, that it's much more powerful if we're at a meeting and Kim says, before we begin the meeting, I want to talk about, Bonnie, you did a great job on that project last week. And I really couldn't have done that without you. It is much better for others to speak nicely about us than we do it ourselves. And that applies to men as well. There's a certain level of, humble brags and self-promotion, but men are given a whole lot more leeway than women are. Many women, when they attempt to be assertive, they believe me and they try to assert, oftentimes they're accused of being aggressive. Many women get accused of being aggressive when they're simply trying to be assertive. Men are called strong and forceful and a leader. And women are just often referred to as the bitch, the B word. Sorry. And it's a dance that women have to play. And that's why in an organization, it's very positive if women can advocate for other women and the men also, that a culture of mentorship is useful. And that in the light of the Me Too Time's Up movements, many men have said to me, Bonnie, I can't mentor another woman. I'll be accused of whatever. And it's too much trouble. It's too much trouble for a man to mentor a woman. So I'm not going to do it. And to actually, Russell, to some degree, I kind of get it. I get it. It is trickier, but it is possible to do it. And, I actually had a man go even further and say, you know what, Bonnie, it's too much trouble to hire women. I'm just going to hire men from now on. And I say, well, that's like one of the more ridiculous things I've ever heard. I said, how about, and he said something like, you can't even hug a woman anymore. And I said, you know what? The fix here is just keep your hands to yourself. And if you're wanting to hug a woman, and congratulations, ask, can I hug you? I'm at conferences all the time, and I will ask somebody, I'd love to hug you right now. Could I hug you? And both men and women, and like the asking permission and make it safe for them to say, actually, no. I've put out my hand to shake hands with somebody and like, oh, no. In the aftermath of the pandemic, people have a thing about touching and, so the layers of the thinking we have to do about all of this stuff is complicated between the genders, but it's so worth it. It's really worth it when it works, when there is respect, true mutual respect. That matters so much. To have a CEO like Mark Benioff of Salesforce to be overt and say, we are committed to closing the wage gap at Salesforce. We want women to be making an equitable salary to men in the same role. And that goes a long way. And they've worked really hard to do that. The leaders who are doing that are attracting high quality women who believe that they've got a leader who sees the value. So it's complicated, isn't it?
It is, because I hear what you're saying about the asking permission to hug and stuff, but that also provides into the layers of power dynamics that some women probably don't even feel that they can say no because that's my boss. And, so right. It's not just permission. It's a psychological safety and the idea that there is a power dynamic in play. And sometimes
100%.
People are just thinking, I want to congratulate you and hug you, not realizing they may not feel safe to say no because you have power over them. You may not realize that, but you need to.
Never mind pull a Matt Lauer and lock the door with a button under your desk. And, then we go on. The extreme of that is, I've heard there's so many famous stories around sexual abuse and humiliation and harassment, but there are so many, Russell, there are so many more of people, just normal people like you and me, who the world doesn't know our names, and it's happening with them too. And boy, how helpless do they feel?
What do you think the solution is here from a culture standpoint? Is it like Salesforce where they're almost making it policy, or do we just fold our arms and wait for leaders to be better at being leaders?
I think it's multifaceted. Here's what I think. I wrote Staff Matters in part to have this book be a tool for staff, like to affect change, to answer your question, to affect change from the middle, to have the staff essentially insist on change, to have women know that bullying and sexual harassment is not okay under any circumstances, and to act sooner. That it's, when I hear that a bully's been fired after 3 years of wreaking havoc on a staff, Russell, that kills me, because that's 3 years of trauma that's been permitted. Next time, I want that. So that guy, probably a man, because most bullies are men, are going to go on to another company if they're fired. And they're going to do the same exact thing unless they're stopped and coached. I'm not saying firing is the answer. We need to expose these behaviors is what my point is. We need to affect change from the middle. Staff needs to feel empowered to say, no one talks to me like that. No one touches me like that.
Mm.
It's just not okay. But then in business schools, the one silver lining about the pandemic is that the curriculum at business schools is changing. That most business schools didn't have a class called how to manage your staff, how to manage people. And now, because the pandemic changed the workplace so much, what I'm hearing is that curriculum at business schools is changing to include material like this and case studies. And how could it not, considering how prevalent they are in the news and in the workplace? So new leaders need to be learning this material in business school, how to be a better leader. And then when they come into a company, you're talking about onboarding. How about getting some training on cultures of respect, how to manage how our culture is that we have a zero tolerance policy for bullying and sexual harassment. And when you see it, this is what you do about it, if and when you see it. I think we need to get ahead of these issues way sooner than we have been. So, what do? We need leaders to be better. We need them to have awareness. And how do they have awareness? Is we have to tell them. And, so in meetings, sometimes it's like little efforts, like you, Russell, speaking up and saying, hey, what a great idea Jill just had, like to build that kind of empowerment. And then, to have staff and the Great Resignation was a really good indicator of many staff feeling unhappy with the way things are at companies. And what I'm aware of is that, staff is not telling the truth all the time at exit interviews. At an exit interview, most staff will say, oh, yes, I'm leaving to make more money, or I'm leaving to get a job where the schedule is better for me. They're not saying, Joe in marketing is a raging bully, or the CEO of our company has been sexually harassing every woman who comes through his office. Like, a lot of people feel like, why should I bother doing that?
And why do they feel that way? Because, and thank you for sort of getting me to the end of the employee journey, which is leaving. I read a stat that for every woman that is promoted to the director level, 2 women directors are leaving the company. That was a McKinsey report. So you're leaving an organization that is toxic or is not equitable. How are you helping the organization get better by not saying anything like that? I mean, don't get me wrong. They may never change. That's out of your control. But why aren't we saying things? Why aren't women saying things as they leave?
Because they're fearful, as they always have been, of repercussion and backlash. They fear that if they're honest, that their honesty will travel with them, that their reputation will become that they're a troublemaker, that they make waves. They're about self-preservation. They want to, in general, protect their livelihood. And who couldn't blame them, right? They want to protect their families. But they, in their heads, they think, well, I'm leaving this jerky company because they didn't care about me. I told them about sexual harassment and they looked the other way, or they, let the bully stay anyway, or the harasser. So the thought is, if they don't care about me, why should I care about them? And what I say to groups of women, especially if they're parents, if they are moms, and or they have young people in their life they care about, my message to them is, I believe we should say something anyway. It may be too late for us, but it's not too late for our children and for your grandkids, who are going to be the staff of the future. How are we going to make this thing better if we don't reveal the problems now? One of the reasons, in the book, which is 400 pages, I have stories from leaders and assistants and recruiters and HR professionals, and I put them all under one book, inside of one book. Because if we agree that there are aspects of the workplace that are broken, no one of those groups alone is going to be able to fix what's broken. So I have to say, Russell, my view of the future workplace is one where these groups are going to need to recognize that we have to work together, that we have to cooperate with each other, that, we refer to staff all the time as the backbone of the company and the right arms to managers and the eyes and the ears and the face of the culture. Well, then we better treat people a bit better, is my point of view.
That is a beautiful lead into the last question I have, Bonnie, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
Have a conversation. My message, we hear so much about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the need for our diverse teams. I believe one of the things that we can do immediately is to think who is in our orbit, who's interesting. Even if you've been working with somebody for a really long time, choose one person a week, maybe have a virtual coffee, have lunch with somebody who doesn't look like you and somebody who doesn't sound like you. And understand it's going to take, I'll bet everybody a Canadian dollar, that you will find a serious area of commonality within the first 5 minutes. I've done it, and it's 100% true. And, you and I bonded over coffee. Russell, we both love coffee. Food is usually a great common denominator between people who are different. But I think that's something we can all do very easily, is say, we've been working with each other for 10 years now, and I realize I don't really know you all that well. Why don't, do you want to have a coffee? See what happens.
I love that. That is Bonnie Low-Kramen. She is the founder CEO of Ultimate Assistant Training and Consulting, and she's written a fabulous book. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Staff Matters, People-Focused Solutions for the Ultimate New Workplace. Thanks so much for being here, Bonnie.
Thanks, Russell, so much.
That's it. That's all. Another episode of Relationships at Work, the Emerging Leader's Guide for Creating a Workplace we Love. I'm Russel Low-Kramen. I am grateful. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to expand your brain a little bit about a topic that is so directly impactful to us as leaders in the workplace, in our experience. If you have a moment, if this episode really resonated with you, or you've listened to another recent episode that has really resonated with you, I ask that you please share it. It doesn't have to be online. It could just be a link in an email off to somebody to help them with their mindset, or to think a little bit differently, or to just remind them that they're not alone in how they think and how we can improve the workplace. Could you do that? It'd be great. Love to get this out a little bit more widespread, so we can help a few more people. All right. Take care. Thanks a lot.